Nicksborough, 1974. The nitrochemical plant explodes. This woman described the disaster 5 hours before it happened. Chicago, 1979. The crash of American Airlines Flight 191. David Booth claims he foresaw every detail in his dreams. Can some people really see into the future? April 1912. The Titanic tragedy was also predicted. What can explain such knowledge of things to come? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. The scientist who invented the communication satellite, the writer of 2010, and now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
I've never had a premonition, and I rather hope I never do. But they're quite common, and a very good example occurred to a good friend of mine many years ago here in Sri Lanka. He was in charge of a brickworks here in the jungle, and one day when he was leaving for his office, the foreman came up to him and said, "Please, master, drive carefully. Something bad is going to happen." So my friend drove carefully, and nothing bad happened. However, when he got to his office, there was a message, "Please return at once." When he got back to the work site, he found that the foreman, the man who just warned him, was dead, killed in a freak accident. There'd been blasting at a quarry almost a mile away. A stone had been hurled this unprecedented distance, passed through a small gap in the roof, hit the man on the head, and killed him instantly. So he had seen an omen. What he had not seen was that it forecast his own death. Such cases are quite common and very puzzling. But do they really foretell the future?
Chicago, May the 25th, 1979. Minutes after the crash of an American Airlines DC-10. 273 passengers are dead. The disaster shocked America. Yet 10 days earlier in Cincinnati, David Booth had foreseen it in a dream.
I looked up in the sky and there's an American Airlines jet. I don't know what kind it was. I didn't know planes that well. And the first thing that struck me about it, where I was and looking at it, was that it wasn't making the sound that it should. For being so close to me, it should be louder than it was. It was flying like this, and then all of a sudden, it goes like this, turns over on its back, and then goes straight down on the ground.
He woke up one morning and he was in tears, very nervous, very upset. And I said, "Well, Dave, what is wrong?" And he says, "I've had this dream." He says, "I don't know where it is or what's going on." He said, "But the plane goes up in the air," and he says, "then it banks off to the right, goes down nose first, and explodes." And he says, "Everybody gets killed." And I said, "Well, Dave, it's just a dream." I said, "Don't let it upset you. Everybody has dreams."
And I thought about it all day, and, what can I do about it? And I went home that night, and normal, everything. Went to sleep. Next day, it happened again. And I woke up. I didn't cry this time. I'm saying, uh-oh, what's going on here? Kept going on every night.
Paul Williams of the Federal Aviation Administration was telephoned at Cincinnati Airport by a distraught David Booth on May the 24th. He remembers that phone call, the day before the crash.
In his dream, what he reported to me was that the aircraft suddenly turned sharply to the right and then dived into the ground. And he described in great detail the explosion that he saw, and every time he described that, he became quite distraught because it was almost as if he was seeing death.
The next night, David Booth saw this film of the air crash on the television news.
The first thing they came on with was the air crash in Chicago. I'm looking at it, and I lost it then. I'm looking at this thing, this is what I've been dreaming about. The whole thing.
And I looked at Dave, and it was just like he turned white as a ghost. He was, you know, it was almost like in shock.
Pictures snatched by an amateur photographer show how the plane crashed. It had lost an engine and rolled over before hitting the ground and exploding. When he learned the facts, Paul Williams realized that David Booth's dream was uncannily accurate.
The coincidences between what David Booth told me on May 24th and what actually happened on May 25th were the airline was exactly correct, the type of aircraft was as he described, a large aircraft with an engine on the tail, which a DC-10 is. The aircraft was not making the right sound, and he described that to me on May 24th. Perhaps the most remarkable coincidence of the whole thing was the similarities of the maneuver that the plane made. It's a very unusual maneuver for a plane to make before crashing. Most of them crash with wings horizontal. They run into some obstruction, a mid-air collision, but the maneuver that David described was very unusual. As a matter of fact, it's the only one I've ever heard of a plane that size.
Does Williams believe David Booth had a vision of the future?
All I can say is I don't know. If David told me that a certain plane was going to crash, I certainly wouldn't get on the plane.
14 years before the Titanic sailed on her maiden voyage in 1912, writer Morgan Robertson had forecast her fate in a novel. Like Titanic, his ship, the Titan, hit an iceberg and sank. One passenger on the Titanic believes a premonition saved her life. Eva Hart, 7 years old in 1912, was emigrating to Canada with her parents. But her mother was convinced the ship was doomed. She begged her husband not to go on board, but he confidently brushed aside her fears. Eva remembers her mother's last-minute plea.
When we were going up the actual gangway to get on this ship, she made yet another plea with him not to go. And he was carrying me, he turned and looked at her and he said, well, this is ridiculous. He said, if you feel as badly as that about it, perhaps you'd better go home to your mother and I'll go on my own and you can follow when you see I've got there quite safely. Of course, she wouldn't do this. And so each night she would change her clothes from whatever she'd been wearing for dinner in the evening and get into a warm woolen dress and her shoes and everything and sit down in the cabin to read or to sew or knit and remain wide awake the whole night. And on this particular night, when this dreadful thing happened, she'd got this glass of orange juice on a table by the side of her bunk, and she said it was very full, and so small was this bump, which she always described as being like a train pulling into a station, it didn't even slop the orange juice over the top. And so anyone else would have thought it was just a little thing, it wouldn't matter, but to her, she knew this was the thing that was the end of everything for her.
Mrs. Hart woke her husband, who went up to the boat deck.
And he came back quite quickly, and he just said to her, you better put this thick coat on, I'll put another one on. And she just looked at him, and he put this coat on her. And do you know, years afterwards, I would say to her sometimes, I can't understand when he came back into the room why you didn't say to him, what is it, what's the matter? You wakened him, you sent him up on deck. And in that lovely, calm voice that my mother had, she would say there was nothing to ask him. I didn't have to ask him what it was. I didn't know it was an iceberg, but I knew it was this something.
Benjamin Hart went down with the ship, but Eva's mother saved her little girl because she'd been expecting disaster.
And if my mother hadn't been sitting up that night, I wouldn't be here now. I owe my life to her premonition. Don't I?
Lake Tahoe, Nevada, one of the great gambling towns of America. Hopeful punters come here to Caesar's Palace Casino in their thousands to play their hunches and the dollar fruit machines.
A lot of nothing.
Californian lawyer Jeff Randolph scooped the greatest jackpot in history in July 1981. $992,000. And he knew weeks in advance he was going to win.
It's the highest amount of money that's ever been paid on a slot machine. This gentleman won it. He came $8,000 short of $1 million, so Caesar's Tahoe decided to round it off to a cool $1 million.
Randolph maintains luck played no part in his win.
What is the first reaction when something like this hits? An unusual calm because I knew it was going to happen.
Weeks earlier, Randolph had publicly announced he'd win the million. It was more than just a hunch.
Everybody thinks they're going to win, and most don't. I think mine was more than a hunch because I felt so strongly about coming up here. There were a series of things that I thought added up to a strong push to get up here to Caesars that weekend. Among others, I had begun telling people that I was going to win it that weekend, and I shaved for the second time in the day, which I had never done before. The first and only time I have ever done so was in the airplane on the way here that night, the night I won the money. I wanted somehow to look presentable and extra nice for all the pictures that were going to be taken after I won the money.
Did they spell your name right, Jeff?
Yes, they did.
Yes.
Delicious.
American President Abraham Lincoln dreamed he saw his own coffin in the White House. Only days later, in April 1865, assassin John Wilkes Booth gunned him down in a Washington theatre. The dream had come tragically true. Another dream of the 1921 Grand National brought happier results. On Grand National Day, in the London Daily Graphic, columnist Hannon Swaffer reported that his friend Dennis Bradley had dreamed the result. Bradley said all the horses would fall except 3. The winner would be wearing tartan colours. Every detail came true. Only 3 horses finished, and winner Sean Sparda carried tartan.
In most cases, premonition anecdotes cannot be accepted as proof because they're usually told well after the event. Ideally, they should be written down and witnessed beforehand so that there's no possible doubt. And one man, a scientist, has attempted to do exactly that.
Peter Fairley collected premonitions of the 1966 Aberfan disaster. Errol May Jones dreamed something black engulfed her school. Hours later, she and her friends died when a coal tip collapsed. Intrigued, Fairley founded the Evening Standard Premonitions Bureau.
It had a simple function. That was to take from anybody a telephone call, a letter, whatever it may be, some form of premonition, and to note it down and to put a time and a date to that and a signature from us as independent observers that that was what they said on that day at that time. And that's all that the Bureau did. I had one call from a man who had seen the winner of the Grand National. He was quite convinced that he had dreamed this, and the reason why it made an impact of him was that he had seen the colours of the jockey's blouse and had then checked and found that the horse that was bearing those colours was called Foinaven. And anybody who remembers that particular Grand National remembers that Foinaven was almost the only horse that finished.
Watch the incredible pilot. Out of the shambles, one horse appeared, complete with rider, Foinaven.
A complete outsider at 100 to 1, Foinaven cruised home exactly as predicted.
In the course of all these replies that we had, there were some which were really very remarkable indeed. For instance, I've got some here. For instance, this is a woman who predicts that there will be hurricanes in Britain and that they will happen in January.
Postmistress Karen Butler sent in the hurricane prediction. It had come to her vividly on the evening of November the 11th, 1967.
Thank you.
Well, I was sitting one evening reading, and I began mentally to get the impression of very strong winds. There were really dreadful winds, very, very strong. And I could see roofs just disintegrating and flying off. I could see trees and branches crashing down. I could see huts and sheds just flying through the air. And I knew the winds were so strong, I said, it's a gale. No, it's not a gale, it's a hurricane. It's a hurricane. And then I said, oh, the people, the poor people. Well, my husband asked me, did I know where this was going to happen? And I said I thought it was in Britain somewhere, but I didn't know exactly where. Then he asked me, did I know when it was going to happen? I said it would be the middle of the month of January.
And on the 15th of January, a hurricane hit Glasgow. The city was devastated. Hurricanes are almost unknown in Britain, and the Premonitions Bureau sadly noted a hit.
Now, we did begin to find one or two people who seemed to be scoring well above average regularly. In fact, we sort of called them our stars. And Lorna Middleton was one of them. Now, this is one of her early ones, and as so often happens, it looks rather vague. She says that she's got headaches and symptoms that usually precede earthquakes. But it was 2 days later that a really massive earthquake hit Skopje.
Well, I rarely have a headache, perhaps 1 or 2 a year. And what I call my earthquake headache is a sharp pain which comes across the forehead, either to the right, to the left, or left to right. The one I particularly remember was the Yugoslav earthquake, because I predicted that about 48 hours before. And that was sent because I had a sharp pain crossing my head.
The problem with all these stars, as we called them, was that the moment that they started to know that we were interested in what they could do and we started to investigate how they did things, it just went. And that, I think, has definitely come through all this to me as a firm conclusion, that if there is such a thing as premonition, it is something which is instantaneous. It is, if you like, a flash of intuition. It doesn't take any time, and if you ask anyone to apply any conscious thought to it, it actually just goes. You might as well pretend it's not there. They are imagining after that. But if they suddenly have it happen to them, it could be. And the other conclusion is that when it happens to you, it is an overpowering sensation. You know that it's going to happen. No matter what it is and how unlikely it is, you know it's going to happen.
Sadly, but not surprisingly, many premonitions aren't exactly what they appear to be. We all know how difficult it is to get the facts right, and everyone loves to embroider a good story. Sometimes a careful investigation reveals a very different picture.
I can see a little scenario, and it came first in my dreams right after he was elected, and it had to do with a gun, and it had to do with shots all over the place.
Professional psychic Tamara Rand made this prediction about President Reagan on American TV.
As I initially felt, it might actually be an assassination attempt or a shot to the president.
March the 30th, 1981. Tamara Rand's prediction looked horribly accurate, yet appearances were deceptive. In fact, the recording was made not on January the 6th, but on March the 31st, 24 hours after the event. In December 1978, American student Richard Newton predicted 45 people would die in a plane crash on March the 11th. And on the 14th of March, 47 people did die at Qatar in the Persian Gulf. He'd also forecast the plane would have red on its tail, and he was right. Yet Newton claimed no psychic powers. He'd just worked it out from statistics that anyone could find in books. First, he noted that the majority of airlines have some red in their logos.
You'll see that more than half have red somewhere in their logos. For instance, American Airlines, Alitalia, TWA, JAL, all have red in their logos. And considering that half of these have red somewhere in their logos, it's a very safe bet to assume that a plane that crashes is going to have red in its logo somewhere. In this book is listed every plane crash for 25 years. I averaged the number of fatalities per crash over that 25-year period and found out that it averaged between 40 and 50. I chose 45, 47 were killed. As far as the time of the year of a crash, I drew this graph. And listed here are the number of crashes, and listed here are the months of the year in which crashes take place. And looking at this graph, you'll notice that March is twice as bad to fly in as May, with an average of about 4.6 crashes per month over that 25-year period. And averaging the month of March crashes here, you'll notice that the second week of March, or the Ides of March, are the worst time of the month in which to fly.
So are there any true insights into the future?
Most premonitions can undoubtedly be explained by coincidence. Even the most improbable events will occur if you wait long enough. The question is, how long is enough? Somebody once said that the laws of chance do not merely permit coincidences, they compel them. We've all had examples of this. Perhaps the commonest is when you think of somebody and 5 minutes later, they call you up on the telephone. Yet other premonitions may involve something more. They may be subconscious foresight, warnings of some danger that the senses have detected, of which we are not yet fully aware. No other explanation is necessary. Premonitions are warnings from our own minds, not from the future. Yet we should take them seriously because the dangers of which they speak may be perfectly real. So that's why I have a strange feeling whenever one of my friends tells me a premonition. Something bad may indeed be about to happen.
On June the 1st, 1974, the nitrochemical plant at Flixborough in Lincolnshire exploded. Disaster struck just before 5. Yet one woman claims she heard the details 5 hours earlier in a TV news flash which broke into the Saturday morning film. Leslie Brennan.
At first I didn't really take much notice of it because I was, waiting for it to finish quick so I can get on with the film. And then I heard them mention the name Flixborough near Grimsby. With that I listened a bit closer to it, and they said there'd been this terrible explosion at Flixborough. There'd been a number of people injured, a number of people killed.
Leslie told her friend Peter East the news when he came to lunch.
I walked down to Leslie's house, which would be about 12 when I got there. Just after we got in, Leslie told us, there'd been an explosion. News flash on television telling us about an explosion.
And we thought no more about it until it came on the news at tea time and 10 o'clock. And then the reporters had said that it had happened at tea time. Well, we just sat back and laughed about it. Said, silly reporters got it wrong again, typical. Dinner time, or so we thought.
But the reporters hadn't got it wrong. The plant went up at 4:53. How could Leslie have known 5 hours ahead?
5 hours difference from what Leslie told us. Leslie had seen it at 12 o'clock time and it happened 5 hours later. We couldn't believe it.
I can remember my friend, I can see her face now. She looked at me and said, oh, you told us about that at dinner time. I said, yes, I know. And I can remember feeling made me feel queer, very cold and shaky. And I can remember getting this shiver all the way through me. And, really, I can't explain the feeling. It was unusual.
In 1971, the submarine Artemis visited Grimsby. The sailors were soon after the local girls. Sandra MacDonald was one.
I met one particular boy and we was with him for about 2 days till it sailed. And it sailed on the 17th, on a Thursday, June. And a week later, on the Wednesday, I had a dream on the night time. And in this dream, I saw big grey stones, which I thought it was like a wall, and I thought that it was a harbour somewhere, and I actually saw the submarine sink, and I don't know how I knew, but there was 3 men trapped on board in the dream.
The first person she told was her mother.
She came down and she said, oh, Mum, I've had an awful dream. She said, the Artemis sank with 3 men aboard. So I said, well, don't worry too much, it's because they've gone away, you've had a good time.
And then a week later, which was the 30th of June, the submarine did actually sink.
I was laid in bed reading, waiting for her to come home, and the news flash came on the radio and said that the Artemis had sank. So when she came home from the dance, I called her into the bedroom and told her what had happened, and I just, Sandra, that dream you had about the Artemis has come true. And she just broke down and cried, because I think I upset her.
When it came true, I was absolutely heartbroken because it frightened me. I mean, I'd never had anything like that before. And at first I thought my mum was joking. Till when she saw how upset I was and everything else. And as I say, we sat up most of the night listening to the bulletins with the radio, me and my mum together, to see if anybody had died on it, because I thought it might be somebody I knew on board.
Artemis had gone down in Portsmouth Harbour. The 3 men on board were rescued. 2 of them were indeed friends of Sandra MacDonald. She's still unnerved by the accuracy of her dream.
I didn't really understand it at first. I'd heard about premonitions, but I was thought it was somebody else. I was quite sceptical about it, really. But obviously it does happen.
Next week, things that go bump in the night. Why do rocks rain down on these houses each night, apparently from nowhere? Does a paranormal force propel them? The police are baffled. They can find no normal explanation. And what caused chaos in this German office? Why did lamps swing when no one was near? Why did the telephone make hundreds of calls while witnesses saw no one was dialing? Was this a supernatural subscriber? Mysteries from the Files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. A scientist who invented the communications satellite, the writer of 2010. And now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
A few years ago, the people who live in this house reported an extraordinary series of events. Household objects moved around, and one observer saw a loaf of bread rise slowly in the air and hurtle across the room. Naturally, the family was scared and had no idea what was going on. But to any student of the paranormal, this spelt poltergeist. Poltergeist is a German word which means noisy spirit, but that's very much of an understatement. Poltergeists are the original things that go bump in the night. When there's a poltergeist in the house, there are strange bangings and crashings, furniture moves around, stones fall out of the blue, machinery goes haywire, all without any apparent physical cause. No wonder that, for centuries, poltergeists have spread alarm and controversy throughout the world.
Thornton Road, Birmingham. It's not the quiet suburban neighbourhood it seems. 5 of these houses are under siege. Night after night, rocks rain down on them. The bizarre bombardment has lasted more than 6 years. Glass in every window has been shattered, forcing the residents to erect barricades to protect their homes. The stones seem to come from nowhere, yet the damage they do is real enough, not just to the buildings, but to the householders' nerves and bank accounts.
We've had all the panes but 2 go on the garage, which are the big panes. I think they're about 14 foot, with reinforced glass, which cost nearly £700 to be replaced. And we have, since they've been replaced and the wire netting's been put up, we've had another 4 panes go now.
Most of the windows on the veranda have been broken. Over £500 worth has been put in there. Various other windows have been cracked. And we have now wired all those windows and have been wired for nearly 12 months.
Birmingham's police confess they're stumped. In charge, Chief Inspector Len Turley.
When I first came here some 12 months ago, I thought at that stage that I would put 2 policemen on it and it would be finished in a couple of days. That has proven to be totally wrong.
The case has all the hallmarks of a poltergeist outbreak. Its eeriest feature is the way the rocks seem to come out of the blue. In vain, the police have combed the gardens for vandals. No human being seems to be throwing the stones. Yet the stakeout goes on in Thornton Road, night after night.
At this stage, we've probably wasted somewhere in the region of 3,500 man-hours in observations and inquiries in the Thornton Road area. The backs of these 4 houses in Thornton Road are virtually a battleground.
And clues are hard to come by.
This is a selection of the stones. This one is about average size. As you can see, it is quite a hefty stone. It's a pebble. It looks as if it's come from a seashore, but it hasn't. The gardens of these houses in this area are all have these pebbles in them. The interesting thing about this and all the others that we've had is everyone appears to have been washed or scrubbed. None of them contain any dirt at all. We have had police officers lying, standing, hiding themselves from 6 p.m. in the evening until 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning in all kinds of weather. They have been on top of roofs of adjoining properties, and in all these occasions, the only thing we can say is at certain times, police officers have heard what they say appear to be stones striking the roof or the back of houses. In none of the occasions when we've been doing observations have we seen anybody.
It's as though somebody's watching you, actually going up into a room and drawing the curtains, and you get stones come over as soon as you seem to appear at the window. It's uncanny, really, because it's just as though somebody's focused on you all the time.
I don't really know what's going on down here. This has been going on for a period of 18 months. And we haven't got a clue who's doing it at all.
Already this year, we have arrested 1,997 criminals. We have solved, in the time we have doing this inquiry at Thornton Road, we have recorded and solved 5 murders, 2 of which have been extremely complicated, and the inquiry was very protracted. And we've used the same expertise on our stone throwings as we have on these other incidents, and we're still no farther forward with the stone throwings.
KVOA-TV of Tucson, Arizona reported a similar pelting poltergeist in 1983.
Richard Birkbigler and his family are virtual hostages in their home. For 60 days, ever since they moved into this isolated area on Tucson's east side, they've been bombarded by rocks thrown by an unknown attacker from the deep brush surrounding the house.
It goes on every night for the last 7 weeks, and the last 2 weeks of for 9 weeks, and the last 2 weeks has been night and day.
The sheriff's department says it has been unable to find any trace of the alleged attacker. But while the search goes on, the Birkbiglers live in fear.
A poltergeist apparently rampaged through a house in Swansea in 1965. The furniture was flung about and objects shot through the air, according to householder Mrs. Howell.
I went out the back kitchen, and as I opened the door, this bottle came flying towards me. And of course I shut the door to protect myself. I opened it again and I seen this other bottle. So I just picked up the children and I ran out the house. As I ran out, my husband was coming down the street here, and he ran straight in the house, and by the time he got in there, all the place was turned upside down. It was terrible. The couch, the TV, everything just thrown in the middle of the room. I went upstairs, and when I got upstairs, the bedroom was all upside down. My little boy's cot was underneath the bed. If he'd have been in it, he would have been killed. And even the police, they had to break into the bedroom before they got there. They haven't got any explanation for it at all, because, as I said, it couldn't be nothing human, because how could it get out of the front bedroom down to the kitchen when the police had to break in?
A poltergeist was apparently photographed in action in Teresa Costa's kitchen in France in 1955. and a poltergeist was blamed for ransacking a house in Abbott Road, Bournemouth in 1981. Food and wrecked furniture were strewn everywhere. Romanian teenager Eleonora Zugun claimed she was attacked by a poltergeist that bit and scratched. Inflamed wheals apparently swelled up on her body before the eyes of investigators in the 1920s. 50 years later, reports of a factory poltergeist caused mayhem in Manchester.
The work here at night has to stop. And quite simply, the trouble is that the men are far too scared to be in these warehouses during those night hours.
The funny thing is, a steel object weighing maybe a pound flies at an aluminium panel, and there's never a dent, never a scratch.
A force of energy, it's like willing a piece of metal or something from one point to another. It just seems to lift itself and fly.
From this pub in Barnsley, Yorkshire, came tales of a playful poltergeist. In 1965, Michael Collindridge was in bed with tonsillitis. He'd been given a walking stick to rap for attention. One day, he swore it took off and waltzed round the room. To the press, the dancing stick was a psychic wonder, and Michael will never forget how the astonishing antics began.
Suddenly I was aware that the stick was moving along the top of the bed. It sounds quite incredible, but the top of the stick was just moving backwards and forwards.
The Cranberries regulars still muse on the mystery.
It actually went up the wall and operated like a pendulum, left and right, you know.
You still go backwards and forwards on top of bed. And then it'd come up and stand on top of bed. Then it used to tap on top of safe, and it used to play tunes. And different people went up and asked it to play different tunes. And tunes were recognisable.
The one that I noticed was Jingle Bells.
You used to tap 2 for no and 1 for yes or something like that. So I asked it, they were all asking it questions, they were tapping, so I says to it, I says, what's his favourite going to win first race tomorrow, like, you know? But no damn.
X-rays at the local hospital revealed nothing. No secret devices for conjuring tricks. But Michael was kept under close observation.
I can remember someone saying, oh, you know, will you take your hands out from under the covers? Which I did. I think actually just one hand was under the covers. Put my hands on the bed and the stick continued to move around. I then sat up. And I can remember that, sort of being sat up in bed with this sort of stick behind me there, still moving.
Well, I stood fascinated watching it, thinking of trickery, but I saw no sign of trickery.
I think, as far as one can say, it was some sort of spiritual influence of some sort, which was possibly attached to Michael rather than the stick itself.
And one day, me and my father went up and we stripped off bed. There were no wires, nothing. But I still think Michael was doing it. Did you used to do it, Michael?
No, I didn't. Nothing to do with me at all.
Well, that was a good one. That was a good one.
The attitude of any serious researcher towards poltergeists should be one of open-minded skepticism. Fraud is always a possibility, and sometimes the culprit gets caught red-handed.
In this woman's house near Zurich, something was smashing the china. She called in researchers who left their video camera running, unknown to her 10-year-old daughter.
Das ist da gestanden, das Brünnli. Dazu, Brigitte.
To the mother, it looked like the work of a poltergeist. And the case might never have been solved if the real culprit hadn't been captured on tape. More crockery came to grief in this shop in the town of Bremen in northern Germany. Vases and glassware were smashed, apparently while no one was there. Yet it never happened when Assistant Heinrich Schultz was out of the building. The experts thought he must be acting as a focus for the poltergeist. But 13 years later, he confessed that he'd done it all himself, and he even demonstrated his technique for the TV cameras. He dropped plates beside a tape recorder to record the sound of them smashing. Later, he set the tape to play back from a hidden place. Others claimed to hear things breaking while he was out of the room. And a policeman who came to investigate found himself right in the firing line.
Some investigators have tried to explain poltergeists by natural causes. And there's one extraordinary case where the explanation was, quite literally, down to earth.
Wisbeach, Cambridgeshire. In 1979, residents of the Mount Pleasant estate were alarmed by inexplicable bangings and rumblings, the terrifying trademarks of the poltergeist.
There was that layer, they was making the glass vibrate in the house itself.
After 2 or 3 days, it was getting quite bad. So much so, in fact, that you could feel the paving stones underneath your feet actually vibrating and scraping together. The manhole covers, you could hear them rattling, and in the house, you could actually see the ornaments on the mantelpiece moving.
I have black brass plates and there's ornaments, and we were sat there watching the telly, and they started to shake at first, and then they just, one by one, started to fall off shelves and off of ready the wall, you know, and you thought, Craigie, whatever's going on here, you know, it just weren't natural.
We didn't really know what it was. I mean, it could have been earthly spirits, if you like, something rearing up underground. We just didn't know what it was, you see. And if you don't know what something is, then it is unnerving, isn't it?
I mean, these sort of things don't happen every day, you know, things just flying off walls and movements from underfoot, you know, it was eerie. It really was.
But the real cause was reassuringly unparanormal. An air relief valve had failed in the main sewer.
Effectively, the air was trapped in the rising main and was, in fact, moving up and down the rising main, causing the tremors. This would be similar to a central heating system. Air gets trapped in, the pipes rattle. If you imagine that in pipes of this size, effectively you've got 10 or 20 times greater noise as well.
And the pipe ran directly under the road where our houses were, and that was their explanation. It was just this sewage pipe, you know.
Elsewhere in Cambridgeshire, they've found poltergeists aren't always so easy to explain.
A gentleman brought out a very plausible theory a number of years ago about geophysical forces underground hitting a house and making things shake, you see. Vibrations go up the wall, hat boxes are thrown off, tables are displaced, vases suddenly move, and people are sitting in this house and they don't realise that it's due to underground water running underneath, or disused drains, or seismic disturbance, or something of that nature, geophysical forces.
Tony Cornell is testing whether such forces can create effects that could be mistaken for poltergeists.
Right, we'll just mount this up here. Down a bit, down a bit.
Engineer Scott Steedman fixes a powerful vibrator to the wall to shake the house just like an earth tremor.
Down a bit, down a bit. This whole house probably weighs about 100 tons.
Yes.
So that a normal earthquake, well, a good-sized earthquake that really would probably do some serious damage to this house, would put perhaps 20 or 40 tons horizontally on this house.
On the mantelpiece, household objects are carefully positioned. the sort of things that fly about during poltergeist outbreaks.
So we can really shake the house properly. So if anything is going to happen, it's going to happen like
Right,
this.
so shall I go upstairs and have a look?
I think it's a good idea.
Right there. Right, now if we come up the stairs here, you see the traditional wardrobe with a hat box has not been thrown off. The idea was that you've got a vibration up the wall and it threw the box off. Nothing's moved there. This hasn't moved, the cup hasn't moved. The plate, sorry, the tin tray balanced on one nail, which is very precarious. That hasn't moved at all. Nothing has come off. Take it up higher.
We're running over 100 hertz.
Well, there's
now.
a low vibration.
About 120 hertz.
I can feel it through my feet.
Well over 10 tons going in and out of this wall 100 times a second.
A typical poltergeist effect at the expense of a cup is it doesn't just drop like that, it flies and smashes, you see. But nothing, we're getting nothing like that at all.
Tony, what can you feel up there?
I can feel it through my feet, but there's nothing moving.
Well, it is a local effect. I mean, it's very local in that wall.
Yeah.
Right, let's wind it up a bit faster.
Yes, that's much.
Only when the machine's really racing, virtually shaking the house to destruction, do things start to fly.
We'll get a nice...
But the artificial earthquake has produced nothing remotely resembling the effects of a poltergeist.
I think the geophysical theory, as pronounced several years ago, is dead as an explanation for poltergeist. That's my view.
I've always been fascinated by poltergeist stories. Almost against my will, I've been compelled to take them seriously because they show certain recurrent features. Often, but not always, there's a disturbed adolescent somewhere in the background. Now, as all parents know, adolescents can raise plenty of hell without paranormal aid. Nevertheless, this persistent feature over many centuries and in many cultures suggests that something strange may be going on.
In the winter of 1967 in Rosenheim, southern Germany, chaos descended on a lawyer's office. Every piece of equipment suddenly went crazy. Herr Adam, the lawyer, and engineer Herr Brunner were caught up in the strange events.
And they fell down. And there were glass splinters everywhere. And once I had a fluorescent light installed.
Up there?
And it rotated too. Even when it was on the floor, it rotated.
It exploded once. Through there?
Yes, then do you remember that painting, oil painting?
Yes.
Yes, she was sitting there, making photocopies. I was standing here in the corner, and in front of my very eyes, the picture rotated.
Here there was a metal cash box. The drawer was like this, and the metal cash box flew out at a right angle to the wall.
It clattered out.
Hurled across the room.
Oh, yes.
And the money was scattered all over both rooms.
That's terrible.
Hundreds of telephone calls were made to the speaking clock, 0119. Dialed at impossible speed, on one occasion 9 calls in 2 minutes, according to the bill.
Here, for example, you can see a column headed 0119, one after the other 20, 30 times, a whole page.
The telephone company laboriously rewired the whole system, but the calls to the speaking clock went on. Professor Hans Bender, Germany's foremost parapsychologist, was summoned to Rosenheim. Soon he announced the cause of the trouble, the office junior, a teenage girl named Anne-Marie. She's now a settled housewife, but Bender believes she was the focus for a genuine poltergeist.
Well, very soon we realized it is a case of poltergeist, depending of Anne-Marie. When the girl was walking through the corridors, the lamps began to swing. We very carefully observed the swinging of the lamp. We did not notice the beginning, but the, amplitude was increasing without the presence of anyone. So there was a supply of force, you know, and nothing happened when she was not present. So it's a very clear case of poltergeist phenomena.
I must say I felt very humble. I was completely shocked. I must believe it. You could put it that way. I must believe it. But I did not want it to happen, you know. That is true, but otherwise, I suppose I was the cause.
The most extraordinary phenomena, I think, are the telephone phenomena. I never observe it in other cases, and the interesting aspect of these telephone phenomena is that Anne-Marie, without having the slightest knowledge of the technical system of a telephone, seems to have acted on swings, and so produced unconsciously these calls for time, 0119, and this for weeks, and sometimes 4 times, 5 times in a minute. And the motivation may have been, when can I go home?
Not at all. I'm no different from anybody else.
Is it possible that adolescents can possess powers which they lose in later life? I think it's very unlikely, but I don't think it's completely impossible.
Next week, ESP.
It's a parade, it's a festive occasion of some kind.
This woman is trying to read another person's thoughts. But is mind-to-mind communication really possible?
Press the button.
Scientists have been investigating for generations.
Hey, wonderful.
One man's convinced he already has proof. He claims that this renowned explorer transmitted thoughts to him from 3,000 miles away in the Arctic. But will the search for the truth about telepathy ever be over? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. The scientist who invented the communications satellite, the writer of 2010. And now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
About the time I started my writing career, some 50 years ago, I came across this book by an American scientist, Dr. J.B. Rhine, Extrasensory Perception. I think this was the first time that phrase, now usually abbreviated to ESP, ever appeared in print. In his work, Dr. Rhine claimed to have established scientifically the existence of telepathy, that is, direct mind-to-mind communication. I was so impressed by Dr. Rhine's work that I later used it as a basis for one of my best-known novels, Childhood's End, which has now gone through 50 editions. The idea that we can receive messages from other minds, often from loved ones in a moment of crisis, is very old indeed. Probably most people have had such a sensation at some time or other. But it's very difficult to prove such cases. From their nature, they are seldom well documented. Much of the evidence for telepathy occurs in the form of anecdotes, some of which are very odd indeed.
Cedarburg, Wisconsin is the home of Mrs. Joyce Hirth. One evening in 1955, her husband and son had gone to the movies. Mrs. Hirth's 5-year-old daughter, little Joycey, came back late from a birthday party and rushed off to join them. The movie theatre was in the main street. Her mother was at home with the washing up.
She waved goodbye to me and skipped up the street, and it wasn't very long until all of a sudden I felt a terrible chill that went all through me. I dropped the plate I was washing and raised my eyes to heaven, and I said, "Oh God, don't let her get killed." At that moment, I knew something awful had happened to my daughter. I immediately went to the telephone. I could hardly dial because I was shaking so. I picked up the receiver. I did get the Rivoli Theater, and a young girl answered the phone. I said, "This is Mrs. Hirth. My daughter was on the way to the theater. She's had an accident. Is she badly hurt?" The girl stammered, "Mrs. Hirth, the accident just happened."
Little Joycey had been hit by a car outside the Rivoli. Manager Ray Nichols remembers how quickly the call came.
There was no way that anybody could have got down and talked to Mrs. Hirth about her daughter, because the phone rang shortly, it couldn't have been a few seconds after that her daughter was hurt, and she says, "Was my daughter hurt?" So I didn't know how she could find out, but it must be about, what, a block and a half, 2 blocks to her home from here. If they'd had a motorcycle waiting for this to happen, they couldn't have got down there in the time for her to call by the time her daughter got hurt.
If you take the shortcut, you go up this street, and just before the corner, there's a parking lot. And you can go through the parking lot and between 2 buildings and come out immediately in front of the theater. There's no way I could see it from this angle. It's all at the upper part of the street. I couldn't possibly see it, and on a different street.
After the accident, little Joyce's first thought was for her mother.
And she said, "Mama," I sat on the curb and I kept saying, "Mama, Mama, I want my mama," but not out loud, just to myself, she said. I didn't hear any sounds whatsoever. I had a feeling of terror that ran all through me. I knew she had had an accident. Now, whether I knew it at the time she was hit or whether I had picked up her thought of calling me just a few seconds later, I don't know.
It had to be extrasensory perception, because there was no other way she could have known. No way.
One night in 1952, midwife Gladys Wright was convinced that a patient needed her. The telephone line to her Norfolk home had been brought down in a snowstorm. The patient, Mrs. Goodwin, was not yet due to give birth, but something told Mrs. Wright to go to her.
We had her tea about 5 o'clock, and I suddenly got this urge that she was wanting me. She was in labour, or wanted me, you see. And then it would go from my mind and come back again. And eventually we decided to go to bed about 10:30. And could I get to sleep? No fear. I tossed and turned, and this kept going through my mind. The longer it went on, the worse it was. It was a complete turmoil, really. And I thought, oh, well, I decided I'd dress myself and go and see what was going on. And with that, my husband said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to Wickner to see Mrs. Goodwin." Well, he said, "You are a blithering idiot." He said, "I should think they'll come for you if they want you." And I said, "Well, the telephones are out." "Why?" He said, "Well, they'll come for you." But he said, "Daft." And I still dressed myself and loaded up the car in this filthy night of weather, and off I go. I was delighted when I pulled up outside the gate to see the whole house lit up. So I literally ran down the garden path, and believe me, there she was, my patient was, with her hands on the kitchen table. Obviously, you could tell, in strong labour.
I did want her badly because there was nobody else I could get. And the nurse, the doctor, he was not in the village either, so we couldn't get him. But fortunately, she appeared out of the blue. Out of the snow, I suppose, really.
Stephen Goodwin was safely delivered in the early hours. His mother's often told him the strange story.
What do you make of it? What can I say? I can't, really, can I? I was compelled to go, without a doubt, in mind. And she wanted me, didn't she?
Shirley Evans and Pat Craven are old friends. In 1977, Mrs. Craven was on holiday in Mombasa, Kenya. Mrs. Evans at home in Lincolnshire.
One morning, I heard Patty. I was asleep. It was dark. And she woke me up. She called me. As near as I can say it, she was saying, she was in very great distress, and she was saying, "Oh, Shirley. Oh, Shirley." And I woke up. She woke me with that. And I could see her. I could see her head, shoulders, just below the bust line. Now, I must explain that Patty is a very smart lady, but she was dressed in the most appalling rag. It had a square neck like that. The sleeves were all in one. It isn't the kind of thing any woman would wear sort of willingly. This bit here was either lace or torn. It wasn't the kind of thing that Pat would ever wear.
But in Kenya, Pat had injured her ankle, and in hospital she'd had to wear a rough cotton gown.
When I came back and called Shirley, the first thing she said was, "Whatever happened to you?" I said, "How do you know?" She says, "Well, I saw you in a peculiar gown." I said, "Yes, I've been in hospital." And she said, "I made a sketch of it." So I said, "Well, have you?" You see. So she said, "Will you make a sketch of it and see if we can compare notes?" And so I did. And when I went down to Shirley's, 3 or 4 days later, it was more or less identical. I don't know how she saw me, but I thought of her when I woke up. Obviously, she just picked me up.
Most cases of telepathy appear spontaneous, flashes of lightning out of the blue. But some people have deliberately attempted to establish telepathic connections, often over great distances. Perhaps the most optimistic experimenters of all attempted to transmit thoughts across the length and breadth of North America, from the icy wastes of the Arctic all the way to an apartment in New York City.
The man in New York was journalist Harold Sherman. Today, he lives in Arkansas with his wife, Martha. The results of his extraordinary experiment in telepathy are carefully preserved in their country cabin. In 1937, Sherman met a famous Arctic explorer, Sir Hubert Wilkins. Wilkins was preparing a new expedition. He'd been hired by the Russian government to search for a plane thought to have crashed near the North Pole.
Everything possible is being done to find our missing aviators.
Wilkins flew north in a consolidated flying boat. Both Wilkins and Sherman were believers in telepathy. They agreed to try a long-distance test. 3 nights a week at 11:30 New York time, Wilkins would go over the events of the day in his mind. 3,000 miles away, Sherman would try to pick up his thoughts.
Well, Catherine, we've gone 20 miles here. We just passed that little church. So
Meanwhile, this man, Reg Iverson, was trying to keep in touch with Wilkins in the conventional way, by shortwave radio. 40 years on, he's come to reminisce with Sherman at his retirement retreat in the Ozark Mountains.
After all this time.
Yeah. What's it been, about 400 years?
Iverson swore an affidavit which stated that his efforts to contact Wilkins had been constantly frustrated by poor reception. In fact, he'd got through only 13 times in 5 months, and attested that Sherman had received more information by telepathy than he had by radio. One night, Sherman even picked up a message meant for him.
He got an impression that Wilkins had an urgent message for me to cancel an order for a piece of radio equipment for one of the members of the crew, of the search flight crew. And the next day, when I went down to the office, why, there was this message here for me. Sure enough, canceling the order for a radio receiver for Holly Kenyon, who was the pilot for the search flight.
A leading parapsychologist, Dr. Gardner Murphy, checked Sherman's impressions against the log kept by Wilkins at his base, Aklavik in Alaska. One day, Wilkins saw a dead dog on the ice. It was one of the many details of the expedition Sherman says he noted on the day that it happened. Another was a fire which broke out in a white house.
Get a definite fire impression as though a house burning. You can see it from your location on the ice. I first thought of fire near your tent. But this may also be true, but the impression persists. It's a white house burning, and quite a crowd gathered around, people running and hurrying toward the flames.
Whatever Wilkins did in far-off Aklavik, Sherman seemed to know. Even the minor discomforts of the expedition did not escape his inner eye.
I had a feeling that Wilkins and maybe members of his crew had bumped their heads on some object, I couldn't determine what. And I recorded, and these are the actual words. Sudden severe pain comes to me, right side of head. And Wilkins wrote me some weeks later, this day, I and members of my crew could not keep from bumping our heads rather severely on the low overhanging stovepipes which we'd installed in our shelter.
Sherman's notebooks contained dozens of these impressions, later confirmed by the expedition log. To Wilkins, the success of the telepathy experiment came as consolation, for the Russian plane, lost in the polar wastes, was never found. In 1930, in a book called Mental Radio, pioneer telepathy tester Mary Sinclair claimed she could reproduce drawings hidden in sealed envelopes. One target was a bird's nest. This is what she drew. Another a volcano. She was right again. But Mary Sinclair's experiments were unsupervised, and so failed to provide scientific proof. Dr. Joseph Banks Rhine was the first to put telepathy testing on a scientific basis. Volunteers in his laboratory at Duke University in North Carolina took part in thousands of card-guessing trials. Rhine designed a range of scientific apparatus, including special packs of Xena cards with distinctive symbols on them. By chance alone, one card in each pile should match the target. Rhine claimed some people, by scoring much higher, proved the existence of ESP. On the other side of the Atlantic, British researchers followed his lead. They too set up elaborate precautions. Experimenters were kept apart. A set of random numbers determined the target cards, and next door the receiver's guesses were carefully logged. But though they tried to be more scientific than their predecessors, these laboratory pioneers failed to convince the world. Today, the search goes on with children.
which of these pictures shall we choose? Which one? Shall we pick that one there? All right, you press the button.
The sender chooses one picture from 5 and concentrates on it.
Working. Good.
You reckon
The receiver has a 20% chance of guessing right.
Oh. Shall we try another one? Which one shall we pick this time? That one there. All right, press the button. Oh, we got it right.
More than 2,000 children of various ages were tested. The 3-year-old scored an extraordinary 46%.
Now, what you would have expected, according to chance, was 20%. So in other words, they were scoring more than twice the amount that they should have obtained. And this was absolutely outrageous as far as ESP tests went. In the next group, the 5-year-olds, they were scoring at about 35% accuracy, again, compared to 20% by chance. So again, their scores were still very, very high. And the last group, the 6 to 8-year-olds, were down to about 26%. So not quite so good, but still statistically very significant. Now, what this meant was that here was a very interesting relationship. The older the children were, the lower was their ESP score, or vice versa. If you want to get a very good score, use very young children.
Dr. Spinelli believes that telepathy is a gift we are all born with. But as we grow up and develop a sense of identity, we learn that we have to keep some thoughts to ourselves.
As we grow older, we build up mental defenses against letting our thoughts escape from our brains or whatever. We sort of build up barriers, mental barriers, but the child still hasn't learned how to do that. And so his thoughts are, in a sense, still very, very open. Because of that, then, you would expect better scores in ESP, and that's what I seem to have found.
White noise is still quite uneven. It sounds almost like ocean waves breaking.
The latest technique, the Ganzfeld. Seeing only red light and hearing only neutral sound, Deborah is cut off from the outside world to make her mind receptive to telepathy.
Almost images of a rock garden or rock waterfall, a Japanese quality to it.
The experiment works with having Deborah just talking about her ideas, her impressions, and having me writing them down at the same time. And at the same time, there's somebody in a distant room who's concentrating on a picture, which might be an art print or something. And hopefully some of what the sender, as he's called, is concentrating on will get across to Deborah and come out through her imagery.
Lettuce growing in a vegetable patch. Growing in furrows. Again, similar, reminiscent of the garden my grandparents had when I was a child.
The general tendency you'll find goes towards one particular picture. You might get association to something that's in the picture, like if somebody sees a bicycle and perhaps what's in the picture is a pair of spectacles and they look pretty similar but they're not exactly the same thing. So you can look for correspondences like that, and in general it's that kind of stuff that tends to get you the good results rather than occasional specific fantastic matches.
Deborah knows it was one of these 4 pictures. Can she pick the right one?
I had actually a great deal of correspondence with this one. I saw a fair number of Disney-type characters, which this is a cartoon image thing. I saw some animals, which, with the poor hedgehog there. My cucumber, Chris, being cut in half, could quite easily be one of the cactus shapes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of green. This one is the only one that has any real green colors in it. I saw tablecloth, which the curtain vaguely reminds me of. So I think I'll rank that one as my first choice.
Well, it's now 50 years since Dr. Ryan published his book. Yet scientists are still arguing about the very existence of ESP. For myself, I must confess I'm getting rather disenchanted with the whole subject. I feel that if it was really anything in telepathy, by this time the arguments would be over. We wouldn't still be waving our arms at one another. Besides, If telepathy exists, why isn't it there when we really need it? What could be more valuable? Think of all the thousands of lives that would be saved every year if we could send mental messages from mind to mind. Yet, though I'm disenchanted, I'm not completely disillusioned. I still think that there might be something in telepathy. So I'm rather glad that serious researchers are still collecting these often puzzling and always fascinating stories.
In 1947, Leslie Bowie was in the RAF. He shared a tent at El Ferdan in Egypt with another airman, Jock McLean. His life was a picture of comfort until one night.
I woke up with the most terrible pain in this finger. Nowhere else, just in that one finger. It got so bad, gradually the pain went up my arm until I must have been almost crying out with agony. Old Jock wakes up and said, "Whatever's the matter?" We both got out of bed, sat on the side. He went outside, took my mug, got some cold water out of the chatty, poured it in, and said, "Here, put your finger in this." So I sat there, my finger in the mug on my wooden locker, like that, just to try and ease it.
Leslie was in pain for hours. Unknown to him, so was his wife, back home in England. At work, a piece of metal swarf had become embedded in her finger.
This is the finger, and the pain, well, it was down there where it was cut and where the swarf was. And the pain, of course, was terrific, and it throbbed down my hand and my arm. And then the doctor said, "Well, come and see me in my surgery in the village," which I did. And I went and he lanced it. And what a relief it was.
May wrote to Leslie about her finger, while from Egypt, Leslie was writing to May about his.
I made it my business to ask May which finger it was that she'd suffered, and it was the same one. And by working out the time factor of United Kingdom and Egypt, at the very moment that May must have been at the doctor suffering this agony of this lancing of this septic finger, was exactly the same moment that I was suffering in the tent at El Ferdan, 4,000 miles away.
Next week, Stigmata, the wounds of Christ. Why does this woman from New Mexico every Easter display the wounds of Christ? For half a century, this Italian priest also bore the marks of the crucifixion. And so, since she was 10, has this girl from California. Are they miraculous signs from heaven or curiosities of earthly medicine? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. The scientist who invented the communications satellite, the writer of 2010, and now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
For over 700 years, Roman Catholics have revered a tiny but growing band of people who appear to bleed with the wounds of Christ. They're called stigmatics, and the wounds they show, stigmata, mimic those of Christ on the cross. The bleeding hands and feet, the crown of thorns, the pierced side. Many stigmatics have attracted huge bands of followers. Some have become saints, others have been denounced as heretics or frauds. Behind the religious phenomenon lies a fascinating medical mystery that doctors are still trying to untangle.
Spring in New Mexico. Preacher Lucy Rael heads home for a unique celebration of Easter.
You're tuned to KKIT Taos, New Mexico, 1340 on your AM radio dial.
This is Evangelist Lucy Rael reminding you that I will be coming home to the Bethel Deliverance Church in Taos for 2 great Easter services on Sunday, April the 22nd at 5 a.m. in the morning and 7 p.m. at night. Remember, all the marks of Christ's crucifixion appear in my body at this time. Come and be...
For Lucy Rael, these Easter services in Taos bring a break from her missionary tours of America and a chance to show family and followers at home the stigmata which never fail to appear on the anniversary of the crucifixion.
Hi, Brian. How are you? During Easter time, all the marks appear in my body. That is, an imprint of crown of thorns comes upon my forehead, and I also get the nail prints in my hands, and then I get the nail prints on my feet, and that also goes from top to bottom of my feet, and I get the stripes on my back, and I get a wound on my side, the same side that Jesus was pierced during the time of the crucifixion. My daughter also, Angelica, the stigmata appears in her body also.
Angelica was just 3 weeks old when she first showed the signs. Her wounds mimicked her mother's. At every church, Lucy packs in the people. They come to witness the stigmata and enjoy her spectacular brand of evangelism. Led by Lucy, the worshippers work themselves into a frenzy. Yet the evening's emotional high is still to come.
Hallelujah. I want some of you people just come up to the front and help pray for just a few moments. Glory to God, hallelujah. Come on.
Apparently, quite suddenly, the wounds in Lucy's hands begin to open.
My God, the blood is coming. Come on and praise the Lord. People, the blood is beginning to come. Hallelujah. Oh, I'm feeling the power of God. I am feeling the peace of Christ. I am feeling the joy of the Lord. Hallelujah. I am feeling His power all over me. Come on and praise Him tonight. Hallelujah. This is just a miracle. Praise the Lord. Come on and get close if you like to see it. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Thank you, Jesus. There's a little bit of the, just a tiny, it seems to me there's a tiny little wound. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. Stay in the...
Lucy believes the stigmata are a sign that she has the power of healing.
Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. God, in the name of Jesus, I claim a miracle right now. Lord, that you will just touch her right now. That you will just heal her right now. God, in the name of Jesus. Oh, God, give her a miracle right now. In the name of Jesus, somebody take care of that woman. Thank you, Jesus. Ayúdame a orar, ayúdame a orar.
The faithful accept the stigmata without question. To them, there is certain miracle. And though there are skeptics, Lucy is serene in her conviction that the wounds are a gift from God.
A lot of people may actually say that this is a fraud or they don't believe, but we can't force anyone to believe. You know, everyone has the right to their belief. We know that not everybody's going to believe, and all I can do is just pray. Well, we just love them all. We love the believers and we love the unbelievers, so we just love everyone and we just pray for them.
The first to show stigmata was St. Francis of Assisi. His wounds appeared in 1224. In 1375, St. Catherine of Siena claimed rays of light from a crucifix burned into her hands, feet and chest. German Anne Catherine Emmerich suffered from the stigmata for 13 years, every Easter until she died in 1824. For 4 years, from 1899, Italian Gemma Galgani bled every week on Thursdays and Fridays. From the 1920s to the 50s, Therese Neumann relived the crucifixion every weekend in Connersreuth, Germany. Blood flowed copiously from her face, feet and chest. But fellow German Otto Muck from Berlin failed to impress the experts in the 1930s. They said his wounds were self-inflicted. And the claims of this woman, Italian Gigliola Giorgini, have fared just as badly. Wounds on her arms, which she said were stigmata, brought her fame, followers and riches, including this luxurious villa near Rome. But in 1984, the religious order she'd founded was exposed as a front for corruption. Gigliola Giorgini was jailed for 10 years. The stigmata of Maria de Conceição from Portugal are still being investigated by doctors. While a self-styled Pope, Clemente Gomez, uses his stigmata to attract vast congregations to his cathedral in southern Spain. But the most venerated stigmatic of modern times was Padre Pio. His wounds appeared in 1918 and bled for half a century. Each day before dawn, huge crowds queued to hear him say Mass. When the church doors were opened, pilgrims jostled for the best view of the man they revered as a saint. Padre Pio was credited with miracles of healing. He was said to have the gift of prophecy, but it was the wonder of the stigmata that brought the worshippers in their hundreds of thousands to see him. In the place where he lived and preached, San Giovanni Rotondo, a town grew up, complete with one of Italy's finest hospitals, a major centre of pilgrimage where once there had been only a primitive friary. Padre Pio was in the Friary Chapel in September 1918, praying in front of the crucifix, when the stigmata first appeared.
He was actually sitting over in this first place in the gallery, making his thanksgiving after Mass. The actual physical stigmatization seems to have come about in this way, that from the resurrected body of Christ, which was in front of Padre Pio on that 20th of September 1918, from the spot of the crucifixion on our Lord's resurrected body came rays of light, which a Dublin doctor explained to me as signs of energy. They crossed the room and went over to Father Pio and opened the secret wounds which had been on his body for 8 entire years. That's all we know.
The relics of Padre Pio's stigmata are preserved in his cell in the friary.
Here's the window that Father Pio would wave and bless from. His sandals on the floor in this case. The shoe size is actually a 9. But as you notice, the sandals are greatly enlarged by the shoemaker because of the swelling from the wounds in the feet. On the writing table, his books of meditation, his rosary, which he said constantly, all through the night and all through the day. A plastic box holding the chips of crusted blood which would fall from his hands when he'd take off his gloves to celebrate Mass. Here are the gloves in the corner of the desk, which looks like a small handkerchief folded in half, stained by the blood that would come out from the wound that went through his heart.
Soon after the stigmata first appeared, Padre Pio hid his hands from the public gaze, except during Mass when the bleeding wounds could be glimpsed. One of the few to see them at close quarters was Monsignor Michael Buckley.
Because I was a student and studying for the priesthood, I was given the special privilege of serving his Mass. And before Mass, he had mittens, and he used to take these mittens off. And then he had a very long arm that covered his hand. Now, as a server, I was kneeling behind him, and so his hand was between me and the candle. And when he lifted up his hands to pray, the alb fell back from his hands, and you could see the light of the candle through his hands as if it was filled with blood.
Padre Pio's assistant was shocked by the wounds.
I had prayed to see them, but unfortunately, when I saw them, it looks like a leprous hand. I said, God, don't let me see them again.
While applying a soothing bandage to his chest, Father Alessio also saw the wound in his side.
Not that I made a trick on him, but I tried to unbutton the thing. I did, and put, you know, the bandage, cool bandage on here. But at the same time, I pulled out the dress, and I saw a wound here, right down here, was so large, with a cross, but not bleeding. Just a cross across here. And that's why I saw the wounds on his side.
Padre Pio died in 1968. More than 100,000 people attended his funeral. The doctors who had examined Padre Pio in his lifetime pronounced his stigmata medically inexplicable, and his death brought no solution. Post-mortem photographs of his hands showed barely a trace of the wounds of 50 years. His side showed only a fine scar. His feet were completely healed. Today, in Manfredonia near San Giovanni, this man, the devil's advocate, is charged with assessing the life of Padre Pio. Don Antonio D'Amico is a member of a Vatican tribunal, which will decide whether Padre Pio should be beatified, the first step to sainthood. The tribunal, presided over by the Bishop of Manfredonia, examines witnesses who knew him in his lifetime. The questions are sent direct from the Vatican. But the one certain answer is that the mystery of Padre Pio's stigmata will remain as tantalizing and unsolved as it has done for half a century.
A curious feature of stigmata is they usually occur in the wrong places. We know that the Romans crucified their victims by driving nails through their wrists, yet stigmatics bleed from the palms of the hands. Moreover, although the Bible says that Jesus was pierced in the side, it doesn't say which side. Some stigmatics bleed from the right, others from the left. They can't all be correct. What the wounds of stigmatics do match are those shown in the pictures and crucifixes in their own churches. This strongly suggests that stigmata are produced not by knives or fingernails, as some skeptics have claimed, but by a much sharper instrument, the human mind.
Dr. Albert Mason published an extraordinary case of the mind's influence over the body.
One day I saw this boy being wheeled into the operating theatre, and I thought he was a massive case of warts. Apart from his face and chest, the rest of his body was covered. You couldn't put a pin in between these millions of warts. And when the surgeon was trying to operate on his hands, I said to him, you know, these cases do very well with hypnosis. And the surgeon gave me a funny look and said, well, why don't you take him and hypnotize him?
So Dr. Mason took the boy away, hypnotized him, and told him that within a week, one arm would be better.
And he came back in a week, and his arm was fairly clear, almost completely clear. And I showed this to Mr. Moore, whose jaw dropped open. And he said, do you know what you've done? And I said, no. He said, this isn't warts. This is congenital ichthyosiform erythrodermia of Brock. He was born with it. It's incurable. It's an organic disease. Go and look it up in the library. I looked it up, and I came back rather shocked, because this disease was due to the absence of sebaceous glands in the skin, and the skin all just piles up on top. And it's incurable because there are no glands there. You can't make them come. And yet somehow that's just what had happened. Some very powerful state of mind must have been engendered by my conviction, my belief, his belief, which sparked this extraordinary reaction.
This is a very impressive display of the mind's powers over the body. Yet here's an even more striking example from the medical literature. It involves a British officer in World War II. While unconscious and under heavy sedation, he developed deep rope marks around his wrists under the very eyes of the doctors. It turned out that, many years before, he'd been a sleepwalker, and so he had been tied to his bed to prevent him from wandering around. Now, if the unconscious mind can create anything as specific as rope marks on the skin, then surely it can also produce stigmata.
Oakland, California. The New Light Baptist Church. Claretta Robertson is famed far beyond the boundaries of her parish. The first recorded non-white and non-Catholic stigmatic. Her case is unique. The stigmata first appeared when she was 10 and already an active member of the New Light Baptist Church. Her hands bled during services. She became a celebrity. Reporters asked her if it made her feel special.
It's special, but I want nobody to treat me like a king and a queen, though.
Later, at Emory High School, the wounds opened up during a maths lesson with teacher Anthony Burris.
Coco began to bleed out of her hands. I mean, it was really just puddles of blood. And so I took a white piece of typing paper and I just scooped it up. And here it is. And I just put it in the vial. And of course, over the years, it has dried some, but there it is, the vial. And here are that's the actual print right there. So I just took her out of the classroom and we went into the principal's office and I asked permission to show her hands to the classes. She walked in his office and opened her hands and he was just spellbound. He said, go ahead. And almost every classroom we went, when she opened her hands, it was silence.
She also bled from her forehead, as though she'd been wearing a crown of thorns like Christ on the cross. At home in suburban Oakland, Claretta's mother, Alice, was amazed and alarmed when her daughter first began to bleed with the stigmata.
I saw the blood come from her hands. I saw the blood come from her feet. I saw the blood come from her right side. And I saw the blood screaming, pouring in her face. But it took me a long time to really believe that it was what they said it was, stigmata, you know. And I said, why my child?
Claretta's mother took her to visit the pediatric clinic.
Light, you see that? Okay.
Dr. Loretta Early remembers the blood flowing from the child's hand.
Oh, that looks perfect.
And she took a film of it.
I observed this blood to somewhat well up in the center over an area of about 1 centimeter and spread out to the palmar creases and then stop over about 3 to 5 minutes. The blood then coagulated and I wiped that blood off, and for a few minutes I saw a circular, slightly bluish area in the center of the palm of the hand, and this disappeared. After taking a 10-powered lens, it was somewhat disappointing that I could find no place where she was bleeding from. It was significant that during the week prior to this onset, she was reading a book called Crossroads by John Webster, a book that I was familiar with, and it was a book about the crucifixion and the agony which Christ went through. And it's a very emotional book of the agony during those last few hours that Christ was on earth.
Claretta identified closely with Christ's suffering, Dr. Early concluded. The intensity of her feelings might have caused her to bleed in sympathy. The doctors could offer no other explanation. There was nothing medically unusual about her. The blood was her own and normal.
I am my Savior, all happy and glad.
For the past 10 years, the pastor and his precious parishioner have wondered why she was chosen to bear the stigmata.
I've often wondered, well, why me? You know, why not one of my sisters? Or why not one of my brothers? but he did chose me. There are a lot of people that don't believe that there's a God or Jesus, and I think he did it to show people that there is a God.
As Claretta has grown older, living with the stigmata has become more of a strain.
I was out to dinner with a friend, and this is the second time this has happened. And we were just sitting there. Maitre d' had brought our food. We're sitting there getting ready to eat. And I go to put my napkin across my lap, and the blood just starts pouring out of my hand. Now, usually it would web up. This day, it poured out like something like you're just pouring something out of a glass. That's the way the blood came out of my hand. I couldn't explain it to anyone, you know. I couldn't do anything but sit there and rush to the bathroom, you know. When it first started, there was no pain, just the bleeding, you know. But as I got older, I started to experience pain, you know, in my hands, like someone is sticking something and driving something through my hands. It's a horrible feeling.
The latest in a line of specialists to investigate Claretta's stigmata is psychiatrist Dr. David Agel. He met her before church on Easter Day. After hearing her story, Agel asked permission to hypnotize Claretta. He wanted to see how readily she responded to suggestion. She went out like a light. This convinced Agel that Claretta's mind could influence her body to an exceptional degree. She could use this technique to control the stigmata if she wished, with a little self-hypnosis.
A little bit more awake, not completely. But what I want you to remember now is this, that when you wish to do this for yourself, you can look at any small object of your choice in a private, quiet place, count slowly to 10, and by the time you reach 10, and you'll be in this very comfortable, relaxed state, you will also have the ability, through this concentration, to keep it away if you want to. It's something that you can use for yourself. It will be your choice from now on.
This Easter, the New Light congregation was not treated to a display of stigmata. Could it be that Claretta can at last control the strange powers of her mind?
She is not someone who clearly is seeking pain and punishment. However, what we do know more about is that she does have a very severe kind of conscience. She has a strong sense of guilt if she feels that she does not do things right for other people. Now, she is a very good hypnotic subject, and that indicates that she has certain powers of concentration that many people do not have, and that is that she can use concentration to go into a trance state and perhaps to influence her body in various ways. The hope is now that she will use some of that powers for her benefit as opposed to in any way that is harmful to her.
Just give up. Let the word.
Are stigmatics genuine? Yes, I believe that many of them are. Whatever the medical explanation, stigmata dramatically demonstrate the almost miraculous power of religious faith.
Next week, ghosts, apparitions and haunted houses. Is this house on the shores of a Florida lake haunted by the ghost of the world's deadliest woman? On a lonely road in England, did this man really give a lift to a phantom? He swears he did. Why was the body of Chicago's Italian bride still fresh 6 years after her death? Does her ghost stalk Mount Carmel Cemetery, trailing the scent of her wedding bouquet? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer, and visionary, the scientist who invented the communications satellite, the writer of 2010, and now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
These are the ramparts of the great fort of Gaul, built by the Dutch in the 17th century to defend themselves against invaders from the sea. The place is steeped in atmosphere, and many of the locals swear that at sunset, they've seen the spectral figure of a Dutch lady floating silently along these battlements. Like the citizens of Gaul, everyone loves a good ghost story. But to many people, they're more than mere fiction. According to a British survey, 1 person out of 10 claims to have encountered a ghost. But what have they really seen? The dead returning, or merely figments of their own imaginations?
This is the place where serious ghost hunters come in their quest for truth, the Windy City.
Come on, everybody, it's time to begin the tour. If you follow me, we'll board the bus right now. We're about to take the Chicago Supernatural Tour, and we'll be visiting the most haunted places on planet Earth here in the city of Chicago.
And among these concrete canyons, no one is more expert on the evidence than their guide, Richard T. Crow.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Chicago Supernatural Tour. The trip you're about to take this afternoon runs some 5 hours in length. We'll be traveling over 100 miles, visiting 13 locations around Chicagoland. Haunted cemeteries, murder sites, other weird locations where people like yourselves have experienced strange and unusual phenomena. We've got something for everybody on board the tour today. If you don't find a ghost that fits your particular needs, you might want to consider haunting a certain stretch of road when you leave this world. We'll bring our bus by and point you out on future tours. On our left is Resurrection Cemetery, the largest cemetery in North America. And it's best known here in Chicago as being the home of the best known, best loved, and most often encountered ghost, Resurrection Mary. She's been seen, for instance, by Jerry Palis, a Southwest Side man, who in 1939 danced with Resurrection Mary.
As we finished the dance that evening, we went to the car, and she says, since you got a car, take me to Archer Road. So as I took her to Archer Road, she said, stop, I want to get out. She says, I want to go across the road. I says, well, that's a cemetery across the road. And she says, that I know. She says, let me out, please. And as she crossed the road and she approached the Resurrection gates, she dematerialized. So then I knew that she was a ghost. That's why her hand was cold and her small of her back was cold at all times. And being an ex-funeral director and embalmer, I knew that she was something else than what I thought she was.
Then there was the case of Sean and Jerry Lape. In 1978, while driving past the cemetery, they suddenly saw a girl dressed in white run in front of the path of their car. The car struck the girl. There was no thud or bump, but she just disappeared as she ran towards the fence and dematerialized.
We're lifelong residents of the southwest side of Chicago, and we know the legend of Resurrection Mary. But no one expects to hit her late one night coming home from their mother-in-law's. I didn't feel anything. There was no bump, no jar, nothing. It wasn't like we hit a human.
Here in Mount Carmel Cemetery are the graves of many famous Italian Chicago businessmen. If you look out the window on your right, we're coming up to the grave of probably the most famous, Al Capone. Al was a mother's boy during life, and he lies buried next to his mother in death. After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, Al was haunted by James Clarke, the first man to die in that massacre. It's said that Clarke's ghost haunted Al all the remaining years of his life. This life-size stone monument marks the resting place of Giulia Bacola Petta. She's called the Italian Bride, that's how she's depicted in the monument, and she was buried in her wedding dress after she died in childbirth at the age of 29 in 1921. Now, sometime after Giulia's death and burial, her mother, Filomena Bacola, began to have a series of unusual dreams. In those dreams, Giulia came back and begged and pleaded with her mother to have the grave exhumed. Finally, when permission was given, 6 years had passed. It was now 1927. The grave was opened, the casket taken out of the ground, and when opened, it was found that Giulia's body was in perfect condition, just as the day she died. Now, that's interesting enough, but the spirit of Giulia has been seen walking through the cemetery at night and walking along the road just beyond us. There are people who claim that they've actually smelled a miraculous scent of roses, even though there are no roses present.
I used to work as a floral designer, and I know each color rose has a different scent, and these were definitely very sweet, small, like tea roses, baby roses. And I kept smelling them, and I didn't say too much, and about, 15 minutes later we were on the bus, and Mr. Crow said, "How many of you smell roses?" And there were about 4 or 5 of us that smelled the roses. And it was the middle of, beginning of November.
As we wrap up the Chicago Supernatural Tour today, I'd like to thank you all for coming along. I hope you've had an enjoyable day. And no matter where you go, I want you always to remember to support your local ghosts.
Weir Lake, Ocklawaha, Florida. This lonely house was the site in 1935 of the longest shootout in FBI history. Notorious gangster Ma Barker had gone into hiding with her son Freddie and an amazing arsenal of weapons. After the shootout, the house was riddled with bullet holes. And so were the gangsters, mother and son. Inside, the house was completely wrecked. Only the chandelier and the china cabinet survived the FBI bullets. Today, the same chandelier still hangs there, but the sinister history of the house is brought back by the bullet holes in the plaster and the doors. Grim reminders of a violent past. Now the house is a holiday home for its owner, Mrs. Elizabeth Turnant. She comes here regularly in the summer and recalls how the family first realized, soon after the shooting, that the house harbored more than mere memories.
We began to hear noises, especially at night. It was like people walking when we were upstairs. We would hear people walking downstairs, and there would be nobody there. Then there were times when we would hear someone downstairs playing cards. It was like a lot of people, not just 3 or 4. And there was a lot of talking, loud talking, so loud that you could almost hear the words they were saying, but you couldn't quite catch them. And you'd hear the cards slapping down on the table and the arguments and kind of almost yelling at each other. And you'd hear the chips going down on the table. But you could never find anybody down there when you'd run down.
Her daughter remembers what happened when 3 boys came to spend the night. Betty Ann Good.
The next morning, one of the boys was very upset, and he said he had stayed up later than the other ones, and that he had gotten in bed and gotten almost asleep, when all of a sudden he saw or heard someone sitting at the end of his bed, and he heard someone combing their long hair, and he reached over, and the boy next to him was there, and he reached over, and the other one was in the other bed, and he just quickly tried to wake all of them up. And the next morning, he swore on a Bible that this had actually happened, that he was sure that that was Ma Barker sitting on his bed.
I think the family is now convinced that it couldn't have been anything else but ghosts or Ma Barker's spirit.
The ancient city of York boasts one of Britain's weirdest sightings. In the shadow of the Minster stands what some people claim is the world's most haunted building, Treasurer's House. An army of Roman soldiers is said to tramp through its gloomy cellars. Harry Martindale, then an apprentice plumber, saw them in 1953. He often revisits the site with tourists. Martindale was installing central heating pipes in a vault which, unknown to him, had been built on top of a Roman road. Suddenly, a Roman soldier marched through the wall.
He came straight out to the wall, across the cellar, and through the wall opposite here. Immediately he came out of a wall, then I started to see a horse come straight out of the wall with a Roman soldier sat astride it. Across the cellar and through the wall opposite here. Once the horse had cleared the wall, then there was a complete column of Roman soldiers came out behind the horse. One of the first things that struck me was when they came through the wall, I couldn't see any of them from the knees down until they came to where the hole had been excavated in the centre of the cellar floor here. And then for about 2 paces, I actually saw them walking on the surface of the Roman road. The first thing I looked at was the helmet. The helmet came straight underneath the chin here, then from the bottom of the helmet, I could see there was a growth of hair. Most of them had beards. On the top half, they wore the broad bands of leather joined together to form a jerkin with the bare arms coming out. Then on the bottom half, they wore a skirt, but not one of them looked in my direction, and initially this was a slight relief as far as I was concerned.
These are traditional ghosts because they live in haunted houses. Is it possible that some places can store images of past events and then play them back in the right circumstances, like video recorders? This has been called the stone tape theory, and though it sounds utterly fantastic, something similar may happen with sounds. An American engineer, Richard Woodbridge, claims to have recaptured noises from the past and thus to have established a new science, acoustic archaeology. Dr. Woodbridge realized that one of man's oldest inventions, the potter's wheel, bears a family relationship to one of his latest, the phonograph. So he carefully explored the grooves in pottery with a sensitive pickup and believes that in at least one case, he was able to recapture the sound of the potter's wheel accidentally recorded. Well, if sounds can be frozen in time, could this also happen to images from the past? I've no idea how this could occur, but it's an intriguing possibility. But perhaps there's no need to look for such far-fetched explanations. There's little doubt that many ghosts are merely the products of overheated imaginations.
On a journey through the United States in 1974, a terrifying vision confronted Vicky Brandon, a sinister motorcyclist.
He looked so evil, you know, and sort of murderous. And he was dressed in the biker sort of outfit, the leather sleeveless waistcoat with a big hairy chest and a sort of a big fat gut hanging out over his belt. And a very sinister looking figure, really. And being alone there late at night, I was just paralyzed with fear, really. And I thought I'm going to be murdered, and I had no more thought it than he was gone. It just vanished into thin air.
The menacing motorcyclist turned out to be just hallucination, as Vicky Brandon soon realized.
I got out of the car and let the dog out, and we were both extremely sick, standing by the ditch. And I finally pulled myself together enough to get back in the car. And when I opened the door, I realized the reason for the trouble. It was full of fumes, and I hadn't noticed them before because we were in there with it. And as soon as I realized, as soon as I smelled it, I remembered that I had bought this stuff, this starter spray, which I think is ether or something in it, and I'd thrown it in the back seat, and I suppose the closure was leaking. And this had leaked all over the car, and we'd been inhaling these fumes for miles.
Vicky's son, 15-year-old Jeff Brandon, had been begging her to buy him a motorbike. But Vicky was frightened of bikes and worried about her son. Upset by the fumes, her brain had conjured up the phantom biker.
When you inhale any strong thing like that, it's like taking an anesthetic, but it mixes up your brain chemistry. And you have this business of seeing apparitions, where there isn't anything there really, but what you are seeing is a projection of the imagery in your own mind.
Strange sounds gave this graveyard its eerie reputation. Buried here are the victims of a rail disaster in 1918. The train carrying the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus was wrecked outside Hammond, Indiana. Performers and animals were aboard in sleeping cars and wagons, which were crushed by a troop train. The trapeze artist survived, but a circus strongman died, along with clowns, bareback riders, and acrobats. 56 of the show people lie here, some known only by nicknames. Fat Man Edward Kahn needed 2 plots side by side in the Showman's Rest. Soon came reports of ghostly animal sounds, the roar of lions and the trumpeting of elephants. Had a phantom circus hit town? The Riverside police were called in. Sergeant John O'Rourke cracked the case on a night patrol.
This particular night I was there flashing my lights on the grave markers, and all of a sudden I heard animal sounds myself. Scared the hell out of me. I jumped about 3 foot in the air and I said, my God, animal sounds coming from the grave. Me, a police officer, I'm hearing them. So it's got to be true. After a few seconds and I became rational of what it was, I really listened and solved the riddle of the animal sounds. What it was, we have Brookfield Zoo, which is one of the largest zoos in the United States. It's located about 1.5 miles down south of the grave sites. And when the atmospheric conditions are right, and you can catch the sounds on coming from the zoo over to the area where we were. This particular night, like I say, were sounds of tigers and lions. I said, my God, I solved one of the riddles of the supernatural. There ain't no animal sounds coming from the grave. It's coming from Brookfield Zoo.
But people who have seen ghosts have often found them so real and so terrifying that they've changed their entire lives to escape.
Silverwood Colliery, Yorkshire. The miners go down to the coalface, but one man stays on the surface. Stephen Dimbleby has been afraid to venture down the pit since the day he encountered a spectral figure in the subterranean darkness.
My first instinct's whether it was someone, one of my mates mucking about, like. So I shone my light in him onto his face and his shoulders and that. When I realised he's got no features on his face. And then he got like an old waistcoat thing on, a T-shirt, and his waistcoat was darker than his T-shirt, but I couldn't really see colours because of smoke. And he got an old helmet on like this one. These kind of helmets they use in them days. And then I realised that it was a ghost. And so I dropped all my tattle that I got with me. I turned around and set off running towards Pit Bottom. And then the next thing I remember after that was waking up in hospital. And then after that, mates, when I saw them days after and that, they tell me that the only thing they could get out of me was that I was saying, I've seen him, God help us, I've seen him.
The pit holds such fears for him that Dimbleby has taken a huge pay cut to stay on the surface.
I just know for definite I would never go down again. I'd sooner leave industry than go back down the pit.
Carpet fitter Roy Fulton thought he knew what to expect on the byways of Bedfordshire. But there's one journey he'll never do again in the dark. He was driving home on the deserted road from Stanbridge to Tottenham when the headlights of his van picked out a lonely hitchhiker.
There was a figure thumbing a lift on a street light down here on the left-hand side. I'll stop just down here and let you see where it is. So we're there now. I thought myself he could either be going to Tottenham or Dunstable. So I thought myself I'd give the lad a lift. He actually walked back into the headlights of the van. He opened the van door He got in, sat down. I asked him where he wanted to go, and all he said was, well, he never said a word, he just pointed up the road. I started the van up, drove off, never made no conversation. It was just about now I leant forward, picked up me packet of cigarettes. In fact, it was just about here. Turned round to offer the lad one, and that man or boy was not sitting there. And, well, I just frightened the life out of me. I turned round and had a look in the back, and I realised that he wasn't in there, because by this time I had switched the interior light on. And by this time I was just sort of panicking, and I just put it in first gear and I went like a bat out of hell.
And the sanctuary he headed for was his local pub, the Glider. Landlord Bill Stone remembers Fulton coming in, shaking and white as a sheet.
He said to me, give us a large Scotch quick. I said, hey, you seen a ghost or what? He said, yeah, I have. I've seen a ghost. I said, don't be silly. He said, I've seen a ghost.
He insisted that we had to go down the police station because he thought if anybody had got hurt or whatever it was, you know, he'd rather find out about it then, you know, than another day. And, I mean, when we got home, it was still on his mind, and in fact, we slept with all the lights on because he was so convinced that it would, I don't know why, that it would come home, follow him home.
There's obviously someone got in that motor, and I do not for note to this day what it was.
For a council house tenant in Grimsby, the shuffling figure of a hooded monk was too much to bear. Driven from her home, Sharon Grenny is moving with her children to a safer place.
My little daughter used to sleep in here, and she slept in here for about 3 months when she started having bad nightmares, saying that something had came into the bedroom, woke her up at night with dishcloths over its face.
I was lying in my bed, and this man came into my room, and he had dishcloths over his head, and I couldn't see his face.
She used to come into my bedroom crying at nights and that, and I just used to put her in bed with me, and she used to go fast off to sleep again. Well, then it started getting pretty regular that she was waking up saying this. So I moved her out of this bedroom and put her into the back bedroom. And after a couple of nights, she started going to sleep every night and not waking up at all. And I put all the toys and that in here, but she would never come into this bedroom and play.
A few weeks later, after her friend Janet had seen the faceless creature, Sharon met it herself.
It was about 8:30 at night, and I was putting my little boy to bed, just tucking him in, and my lights went out, and I started hearing all shuffling noises. And when my lights came back on, it came walking into the bedroom, and it stood at the foot of my bed. I couldn't see no eyes or no nose or anything, just his hood. I couldn't see no hair. And I stood there staring at him, and I thought, well, if I run out the bedroom, is he going to shut me in? Is he going to keep me in, you know, sort of like try and lock me in the bedroom? And I sort of like something just come over me to run out the bedroom. And I forgot all about my little boy. I just run out the bedroom, straight down the stairs, and then I asked Janet to come back up the stairs with me and get my little boy out. And when we came back up the stairs, got my little boy out the bedroom, and it had gone.
And now the understanding council has found Sharon another home.
I've no doubt that people really do see apparitions, but I don't believe that the dead return. It's very rare for two people to see a ghost at the same time, which makes me suspect that it's all in the eye of the beholder. So here's a theory of mine that may be crazy enough to be true. The human eye is a camera. It forms an image of the outer world on its sensitive screen, the retina, and then transmits it to the brain. Could the system sometimes work in reverse, so the brain sends images to the eye, making it not a camera, but a TV screen? Then believing would be seeing. This phenomenon might be caused by grief, by powerful emotions, by drugs, or plain expectation. But is there any point in adding to the pile of theories? We all love a good ghost story. Do we really want to know the mundane truth?
This photograph was taken by a vicar in his church. What can explain the eerie figure by the altar? When this girl's photograph was taken in 1917, were there really fairies at the bottom of a Yorkshire garden? This weird picture of a London bus was taken by a man who claims he could think photographs straight onto film. Can the camera really capture the psychic world? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, scientist, writer and visionary. The scientist who invented the communication satellite, the writer of 2010, and now in retreat in Sri Lanka, the visionary who ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
Investigating the supernatural can be a very frustrating experience. So much depends on second-hand reports and eyewitnesses' powers of observation. Yet, a single good photograph could settle the matter once and for all. Most apparently psychic photographs seem to turn up by accident. But in the 1960s, one man claimed that he could take them at will. His name was Ted Sirios, and he asserted that he could imprint images on film merely by thinking at the camera.
Ted Sirius called his technique thoughtography. He usually used Polaroid cameras, and sometimes extraordinary photographs emerged. Blurred and distorted, but often showing buildings miles away from the cameras. This 1967 session was organised by Ted's champion, psychiatrist Dr. Jewel Eisenbud. Today, Ted and Jewel are reunited for another thoughtographic test. Dr. Eisenbud has taken time off from his busy practice. Pausing only to collect essential supplies, they're bound for Dr. Eisenbud's cabin outside Denver in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. In his heyday, Ted astonished the psychic world with his performance as a thoughtographer.
When he was hot, when he was in the groove, what happened was that first he would start by alternating whiteys and blackies. Blackies is total obstruction of the light, no light getting in. Whiteys is total overexposure, which shouldn't have been. Then the pictures would start getting darker and darker and darker, and then he would start to imprint parts of people or scenes.
Like this church in Germany, where Ted had never been, or this blurred writing identified as a sign from a Mounties building. But in Ted's version, the word Canadian seems to be misspelt.
This is a Stagger Wing airplane. This is what Ted got. Here you will notice that the strut here is an inverted V. Up here he has re-inverted it, so that this is his typical signature. Now this type of rearrangement is exactly what we do in dreams, exactly.
No, don't even trigger it. When I say now, something bang like that. I got a good idea.
Could Ted have been cheating? Impossible, says Eisenbud.
Ted was continually observed by dozens of people, sometimes 6, 8 in a session.
Ted usually held a tube of paper in front of the lens. He called it his gizmo and said it helped concentrate his thoughts. Ted's last thoughtograph was of curtains, but that was 10 years ago. Can he produce anything now?
I'm after one thing, and that's a person that's holding something. Okay.
But all he got was his face.
Now you press the button.
All right.
Oh. Good.
Undaunted, Ted and Jewel work on into the night, trying everything they know to recapture the spirit of success.
Come on, take some film juice. You know.
Randy's gonna like
this.
This
is. We did this night after night for 3 years. The sessions would last 6, 8 hours, and at the beginning, nothing would happen.
But later, in those original sessions, weird pictures would often emerge. How did it happen? 2 observers who watched Ted in action for a whole weekend suspected his gizmo, the rolled-up tube of paper. Charles Reynolds and David Eisendrath, experts in both photography and conjuring, speculate that Ted might have used the gizmo to hide a pocket magnifying lens with a tiny slide stuck on the end.
By taking a piece of a transparency, a piece of a photographic transparency, and fastening it across the end, when light passes through the transparency and then through the lens, is picked up by the optical system of the Polaroid camera, and voila, it becomes a photographic image. This is Big Ben, and let's just see how it looks on your camera.
Using a device like this, they reckon Ted could have produced any picture he wanted.
Charlie is going to hold it. The light from the wink light is going to bounce off of Charlie's shirt and jacket and pass through this lens, through the lens of the camera, and hopefully make a good image on the film. You want to mask off as much of that lens as you can now. Hold it down. Good.
Thing. Yeah, all right. Now, you must realize that when Ted is doing this, a great deal of chaos is taking place. And it's very possible that he could have ditched that, as I just did. And when they said, let me see this thing, he could say, yeah, look at it, you know. And in the meantime, he's drinking beer, and people are running around, and a great deal is happening. And it's very, very easy, under those circumstances, for somebody to do this. You don't even have to be a magician.
So have Reynolds and Eisendrath proved that Ted was never psychic?
I cannot say that he doesn't have supernatural or extraterrestrial powers, but in 3 days, I never saw him do anything that led me to believe that he did have them.
Of all alleged psychic photographs, perhaps the most famous are these of fairies in a Yorkshire glen.
Frances Griffiths has brought her daughter to see the house in Cottingley, where she lived with her cousin Elsie Wright during the First World War.
Pretty village than I thought. Much nicer. And where's the back? Well, the back's around the corner, around there.
Frances and Elsie used to go down to play by the beck, the stream at the bottom of the garden. And it was by that stream, they said, that in 1917 they took photographs of fairies. That summer, 10-year-old Frances kept falling into the beck and getting into trouble. When her mother asked her why she went there, she said to see the fairies. To back up the story, 16-year-old Elsie borrowed her father's camera to try and photograph them. The girls came home an hour later. Elsie begged her father to waste no time. He had a darkroom in the cupboard under the stairs. She remembers watching anxiously while he developed the plate, impatient to see how it was going to come out.
Dad says, I'll tell you what it's coming up like, that picture you've taken. He says, it's very untidy. He says, you've been eating sandwiches, the sandwich paper's all sticking up. And then he says, oh, what's these little leg things down here?
And Elsie shouted out, they've come out.
A month after this first picture, they produced another, of Elsie with a winged gnome. These two photographs amazed Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes. He published them in the Strand magazine and pronounced them genuine. The story hit the headlines, and within days went round the world. Though some critics were sceptical, Conan Doyle remained convinced. He arranged for the girls to be given new cameras. They took more pictures. Frances and the Leaping Fairy, Elsie and the Winged Fairy offering a posy of flowers, and finally, the Fairy Bower. For 50 years, they stuck to their story.
Did you in any way fabricate those photographs?
Of course not. You tell us how she could do it, and we'll tell it. Yeah. And then we'll tell you. Remember, she was 16. I was 10.
The case was finally cracked in 1982 with evidence from the Brotherton collection in Leeds University. It holds what are supposed to be the original negatives and prints. But Geoffrey Crawley, editor of the British Journal of Photography, soon realised that the Midge camera which the girls used simply wasn't good enough to have taken the first photograph. In particular, the simple lens could not have produced such a sharp negative.
This negative is quite lively. The edges of the fairy figures are quite sharp, and it clearly could not have been produced by that lens in that Midge camera.
Crawley reasoned that this cannot have been the original print. Amazingly, he unearthed in Cottingley what he believes is an original print. It looks quite different.
The original print is much softer, exactly the type of, shall we say, less lively image that you would expect from a camera of this type. Consequently, a lot must have gone on between that and that.
Crawley believes that the photograph was retouched by an expert.
So what you would have to do is, first of all, make yourself a fresh negative of this. And you retouch that negative, you improve it with an airbrush, and people were very skilled in those days, possibly more skilled than today even. Now, it's the fairies that everybody's interested in. So he subdues the face, brings out the fairies. And this is the first thing that people noticed, and they said they were glowing with ethereal light.
And on the negative plate, he found evidence that the face had been subdued, probably by rubbing with Brasso. He thinks that the man behind it was Edward Gardner, believer in fairies and friend of Conan Doyle. When Crawley published his findings, Frances and Elsie confessed that the pictures were fakes. What really happened was this. After Frances had claimed she'd seen fairies up the beck, both girls were teased by the adults. Elsie hit on a scheme to stop the teasing.
Elsa said one night, we were getting ready for bed, she said, I've been thinking, kid, she was a real cinema goer, Elsa. She says, what about if I draw some fairies and cut them out in cardboard, and we'll stick them up in the grass and see if Uncle and Dad will have the camera and we'll take a photograph. So if they see them, they'll have to believe it, they'll stop all this joking.
So she lent Elsie this book, and from page 104, Elsie traced this group of dancing girls, took off their wispy drapes, drew wings on them, cut them out, and arranged them in an artistic group. Then she took the photograph. To stand them upright, they used hat pins.
What we did, and I said, with the long hat pin, we put it down the back like that, and stuck the tape at the back like that, and then gradually wormed that down. They were longer than that, though. They were about that then, 18 inches at least, and then wormed that down into the earth. And they said that the thing was that they could see them, that the fairies were moving when the photograph was taken, but that's because they did it in the breeze.
I'd never even thought of it being a fraud. It was just Elsie and I having a bit of fun. And I can't understand it to this day why people were taken in. They wanted to be taken in. Because people often say to me, don't you feel ashamed that you've made all these poor people look fools. They believed in you. But I don't, because they wanted to believe. Look at this photograph. That fairy's all out of drawing. That leg doesn't belong to that fairy. And somebody pointed it out in the newspaper. And one of our dear believers said, well, fairies aren't like humans. They haven't got bodies like we have, or the skeleton and the arms and legs. They sort of put it together with thought, and sometimes it doesn't come out right. We didn't have to tell a lie about it at all, because always somebody came out to justify it.
It was very embarrassing because, I mean, two village kids and a brilliant man like Conan Doyle, well, we could only just keep quiet.
But has the Beck yielded all its secrets? Though she admits the photographs were fakes, Frances still maintains that there were fairies at the bottom of the garden.
I'd swear that there are fairies up there, or there were then. There aren't now.
The Cottingley fairies were great fun while they lasted, which was most of this century. And the case is very instructive. It shows that claims made by sweet, innocent children must be treated as cautiously as those by adults.
Some photographers have been astonished by their own pictures, like Gordon Carroll.
I stood in this church and I took this photograph and it looks as if it's got a ghost on it. I'm absolutely sure there was nobody in the church at the time. Sun was coming through from the south-southwest position. It was about, I should say, between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. I took this picture on a brief time exposure of about 2 seconds, and there was nothing there.
But when the slide was processed, it showed a hazy, kneeling figure.
The figure was totally transparent. You could see the altar rails through the figure and also the steps. One of the possibilities is that somebody, you know, having walked in front, but how in 2 seconds of my looking at the camera taking a brief time exposure, anybody could walk in, kneel down and disappear. It's just impossible for it to have been another human being.
Mabel Chinnery took this picture of her husband Jim, and her mother appears to be in the back seat. But the Chinnerys say they had just photographed her grave, for mother had died a week before.
My wife took the photo at the graveside, and when we got down to the car, I got in the car, she said, wait a minute, she said, I'll finish this film off. And she took my photo, and that was the finish of that.
When I looked through the viewfinder, all I saw was Jimmy in the car and snapped it, and that was that. Didn't think more about it.
But there in the photograph was this unmistakable figure.
Well, I took it and showed it to somebody, and they said, your mother in the back. And I said, don't be so stupid. But she was there. Well, I could see it was my mother, of course. I could see it was her.
The most extraordinary thing about this is that she always used to sit on that side of the car when she was out with me so that she could talk to me and see me as I was driving.
Jim remembers his mother-in-law's last words.
She said, Jim, she said, you'll never come to any harm. She said, I shall still be with you.
Over the years, quite a few mysterious photographs have been published which appear to show ghosts. Here's a famous example made by a respected solicitor in a church in Arundel, Sussex in 1940. It shows a weird, luminous figure standing in front of the altar. And here's another church ghost made by the Reverend Kenneth Lord in his church in Newby, Yorkshire. And it shows a hooded figure with a ghastly, skull-like face standing beside the altar rail. Well, do these pictures really prove the existence of ghosts? Or can it be that even when photographers are honest, cameras can lie?
In this Home Office laboratory is the world's most advanced equipment for the examination of photographs. Using a computer, forensic experts help the police to snare criminals by enhancing photographic images to bring out hidden detail. Today, the computer is focused on the phantoms. The photographs are optically scanned and fed into the computer for analysis. Tim Newton and Dr. Steve Gull begin with Gordon Carroll's photograph.
This is a picture, is allegedly of a ghost in front of an altar, but let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. Now I think we can see on the screen that it's a kneeling figure. And if we look over here, perhaps we can see a dustpan. Perhaps, do you think?
That's possible, certainly possible. It's a bit beyond the resolution possible with this film, but as you say, it could be a dustpan sitting there.
Their unique deblurring software, often used to decipher the number plates of getaway cars, reveals that this figure may have moved more than once.
So what seems to have happened here is that somebody in a very long exposure picture in a very dark church has been cleaning the step and moved several times during the course of the exposure.
Their conclusion? The picture shows a cleaning lady. But what about Mrs. Chinnery's photograph?
There are some very strange things here.
This scarf definitely does pass this line here, but further down the picture, the line is definitely in front of her. There's also this feature on the other side of the barrier between the two windows.
It does seem to be as if it might be a shoulder, then that does make a
broad person,
very wide
yes.
person. It's perhaps the best explanation then, Tim, is if some mistake has happened here, some very short exposure sometime before has been superimposed upon the picture of the car.
In the Arundel photograph, they've noticed a bright streak to the left of the figure.
Isn't it strange how the streak seems to end on this candle?
Yes, it certainly does seem to be heading that way. We can increase the contrast of this picture.
It does seem strange that the priest should be wearing a skirt.
That's
so
definitely a
I
skirt.
think we should conclude that this is probably a woman.
Yes, certainly.
We can now see this streak is definitely very clearly defined, and since it's ending up at this candle, we can probably say it's a taper used to light a candle up here.
If their hunch is right, and the picture shows a woman carrying a lighted taper up the altar steps, that would explain the bumps in the streak, and the height of the bumps should be the same as the height of the steps.
So if I measure the top point here, and the bottom point down there, gives me a height difference of about 24 units on this. And if I repeat the operation and go from the height difference from one step to the step below, gives me a height difference of 25 units. That's very close indeed. That's almost definitely due to her walking up the stairs.
So that seems pretty conclusive then. We can be pretty sure this isn't a ghost.
I think
and
we
there's
can,
a perfectly
yes.
natural explanation for this, that somebody came into the church and up the stairs to light the candle while the picture was being taken.
Yes, and she's just moving slowly across the altar, lighting each of the candles in turn.
But what about the sinister figure snapped by the Reverend Kenneth Lord in his church at Newby in Yorkshire? Even the most rigorous computer analysis cannot provide a simple photographic explanation.
I don't think at this stage there's anything unusual about the picture at all. So I think our conclusions from this is that it's unlikely to have been built up by a superposition of photographs. So this could be a candidate for a ghost.
Although a very few photographs are difficult to explain away, not a single one of them offers convincing proof that a ghost has been captured by the camera. And this, I believe, provides conclusive evidence about the nature of ghosts. For more than a century, millions of cameras have been clicking all over the world. By this time, there must be billions of photographs in existence. If ghosts could be photographed, by now we'd have entire galleries full of portraits. But we don't, because these images exist only in the minds of the observers. I believe that ghosts are at least as real as dreams, and no one has ever photographed a dream. Yet one day, that might be possible. And then we'd have cameras that could really capture ghosts.
Next week, reincarnation. Have we lived before?